Irish Nation, welcome to the show. I'm your co-host, Brett, along with my buddy here joining me today, Mike, as always. Mike, this is the first time I've been to a Notre Dame football game in I don't know how long, maybe in a decade, where the day after the game, I haven't lost my voice. I've broken the streak. I didn't lose my voice. Came away from a really fun weekend in South Bend. How's it going on your end?
Good. I think I'm grateful that we have your voice for the whole episode, because that is, again, as you said, that I think that's a pretty rare occurrence after a big game. Which just I think that speaks to how good of a fan Brett is that he's willing to just put his voice on the line. Because
Exactly.
Brett will show up to work and his voice will sound like that. He'll have like a big meeting and his voice will sound like this for like 2 days afterwards. But yeah, thankfully I think if the stress of the first quarter had lasted the entire game, you probably wouldn't have the voice. But thankfully, we seem to figure it out in the second quarter. But yeah, I'm doing well. I think overall, when we went back through the stats, I felt a lot better about this game than maybe I did immediately after. I think we'll get more into it, but I think the story was okay, bad start, and then we looked pretty good once we kind of found our footing. But otherwise, yeah, things are good. I went to Rams 49ers game today, which had a lot of theatrics. My buddy gave me his season tickets on the condition that I had to get him the Sean McVay bobblehead. He really wanted that Sean McVay bobblehead. He was willing to not sell his tickets and instead give them to me for free so that I could secure the bobblehead for him. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
just a good weekend of football.
And a big day for Kyren Williams, Notre Dame's
Yeah.
third-year running back in the NFL, had 3 touchdowns in that game and helped him come back for an overtime victory.
And he had to flip into the end zone. So on
Yeah,
one of them,
that was a
he
pretty
did
awesome
a
highlight reel.
very, impressive flip into the end. Yeah. So big day for Kyron Williams. So fun, always fun watching the Notre Dame guys do well in the NFL.
Awesome stuff. Well, couple housekeeping items. Mike and I have back-to-back trips to Europe. So this is the last show, I think, in the next 3 weeks that you and I will be doing it together. We'll have some solo shows coming up. Stay tuned for those. To all of our listeners, might have a couple of surprise guests that we might sprinkle in, but very likely going to be some solo shows as I bounce around Italy. And Mike, you're going to be in Spain?
Spain. Yeah. So Paris for 5 days and then Spain for like 4 days. So I have a friend who's getting married in southern Spain in Marabella. So figured that was a good opportunity to see some spots in Europe.
Awesome stuff. And so on today's show, we will review the Miami of Ohio game, look ahead to possibly the toughest game on Notre Dame's schedule for the whole season, Louisville. And then we will come back at the end. We'll be pretty brief on it during the Miami of Ohio recap, but are going to do a quick segment on just level setting on the number one topic in ND Nation right now, quarterback play. Should Riley Leonard be the starter? What's going on in the quarterback room? We'll break down our thoughts on that as we round out the show. Diving into Miami of Ohio, 28-3. Notre Dame comes away with a resounding victory, a rough, slow first quarter from the offense. But before we get to that, I always love starting with the side of the ball that plays the best. Let's start on the defense. It was so fun. Mike, where do you want to begin on the defensive side of the ball?
So if you'll allow me, I'm going to start with Ben Morrison here, which I know you love to call him out as much as possible, but I think I really just want to call him out just to appreciate his level of talent. So his stats don't pop off the page, but that's very deliberate. So it was very obvious that Miami of Ohio, when they were going through their film, when they were developing their game plan, they decided they were going to find where number 20 was every single play, look at him, and then just avoid him as much as possible. And honestly, it didn't even seem like they looked in his direction for most of the game. So he's targeted 5 times, 1 catch for 3 yards. So completely shut down his opposition. And it is, so it is a bit of a shame because I think when you think about all Americans, typically you need some gaudy stats, and it'll be, maybe he'll be a case where he actually bucks the trend. But the way he's playing this year, it's just everyone is avoiding him, so he's not putting up these big numbers, which might mean that he doesn't become an All-American because he doesn't have a million interceptions. But the advanced stats, if you look at the advanced stats, if you look at the actual impact that he's having, it tells you absolutely that he's having a huge impact on the game and that he's a generational talent. He's not, for instance, right here, he's on pace to allow 32 catches for 300 yards on the season, lining up exclusively against the wide receiver one for the other team. So I think that's pretty rare when you have a talent like that on your team. And I want to call him out just so he's getting the level of recognition that he deserves. And then a bit of a tangent here. So while they weren't going after Ben Morrison, obviously they tried to go after other parts of the secondary, particularly Christian Gray. And we'll get into this more, but it was very much to their peril and definitely did not work out for Miami of Ohio at all.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, as you look at what's kind of the one stat you really need to know about this game, it was really hard to pick between two. The Notre Dame defensive havoc rate and the Miami of Ohio success rate. So success rate measures how often does an offense stay on schedule. Do you get at least 5 yards on first down, at least 70% of the yards to go on second down, or converting the all important third down? And then on the flip side, how often can a defense not only get you off of schedule, but have a very disruptive play, breaking up a pass, getting an interception, getting a tackle for loss, getting a sack? We talk about havoc rate all the time. Defenses want to be in the mid teens. Notre Dame's havoc rate in this game is 28%. We generated pressure on the quarterback on 24% of dropbacks. We allowed 0 passing yards when their opposing quarterback was under pressure. Like when we brought pressure, they got 0 completions in the game. I just think that level of havoc, that level of disruption, the 2 interceptions, the ability to get off the field, even when we have a muffed punt, to not give up points in that situation and get the deflected interception by by Junior Tuilamaka. 5 sacks in this game, 2 by Boubacar Traore. I just thought overall the disruption of the defense was really what set the tone of this game. Really made the game, even while our offense was struggling, just never feel in doubt. Like this game was really never in doubt like NIU because the defense completely took over this football game.
Totally. And so, Brett, I'm totally with you on it. The stat that really flied off the page to me was that havoc rate, because I think when you have a 28% havoc rate, it's going to be really hard to do anything else as an offense. And you see that in the success rate. And then moving to that success rate, unsurprisingly, the success rate was very low. So I think if we had a game where we just had good havoc, we'd be singing the praises of the success rate. But it's just that the havoc rate was so exceptional, which a couple of weeks ago we called out some concern over the havoc rate. We weren't generating a ton. The Notre Dame defense has really answered that in the last 2 weeks. Last week, 50% havoc against Purdue, and then another 28% against Miami of Ohio. So we've really been generating havoc in spades. And as I mentioned, it makes it really hard for the offense to do anything, and that becomes reflected in the success rate. So in this game, Miami, Ohio only generated 36% success rate. Typically, if you want your offense to be on schedule, you want to be mid to high 40s. That's kind of like an ideal situation to be in. 36%, that just means you're struggling to ever put yourself in a position to convert on first downs, convert on third downs, just generally move the ball downfield. And so look, I think overall just like very impressive in those two aspects. One key aspect of this low success rate was just our tackling. And before I had even looked up this stat, I think even just watching the game, it seemed like our tackling was very clean. It seemed like in space, we tended to wrap people up, tended to bring them down. We weren't allowing a whole lot of extra yards. Only 5 missed tackles this game. That's a 10% missed tackle rate. That would be among the best in the country if you carried that throughout the entire season. And I think one note to make here is that so during the bye week, we're gonna dive into all these stats a little bit more, kind of see how we're stacking up against the rest of the country. But overall, I think these ones that Brett and I are mentioning right here, we're feeling a lot better about. And this type of stuff is reflected in other statistics too. So if you have a really, really good success rate that you're allowing, like really low success rate, ton of havoc, not surprising that you're only allowing 3.3 yards per attempt, which is what we had this game. And we only allowed 2 drives over 27 yards. So we limited explosiveness. So pretty much any way you want to slice up our defensive performance, it was extremely impressive and exceptional. Brett was texting me in the middle of the game, Al Goldman for Heisman. He probably texted me that like 4 times. So, but when you look at these stats, it's impressive. I mean, again,
For
like
head
Miami,
coach, for quarterback, for president, like honestly, whatever job Al Golden wants, I am in support.
yeah, and Miami of Ohio. Look, this is not a great offense at all, but still, these are I would say, even playing an offense that is ranks where Miami of Ohio does, which is near the back of the entire country. It's still impressive to put up stats like this.
Absolutely. And I thought the other big key theme that we've been talking about quite a bit this year, but I think it's worth continuing to mention the sheer depth that we're playing with on defense makes me feel good, not just about this year, but even next year. Like we'll get into the secondary here in a second, but I think we could play without Ben Morrison and still be a top 15 defense. I'm not saying we wouldn't take a step back. I think he might be the best defensive player in the country. barring, I get it, everything you said, the gaudy stats might not be there for like an All-American campaign. But if you just break down play-by-play data, like he's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. And I think he's just an absolute elite corner. And in this game, I was texting you, Mike, and some of our friends, like, hey, I'm in the stadium. Am I missing an update? Like, is Ben Morrison hurt? Because I haven't seen him play in 3 straight drives. And we ran out a true freshman, Leonard Moore, who got mop-up duty last week against Purdue. Otherwise, hasn't really played this year. And it was a 14-3 game, and Leonard Moore was playing several drives in the second half, played 23 snaps in this game, 4 drives. He had 2 tackles in the run game, doesn't allow a catch in coverage, like was just a very, very solid contributor. I thought Christian Gray looked amazing opposite Ben Morrison as the starter. Again, as you mentioned, they were doing everything they could to not go after Morrison, so they were therefore throwing it wherever Christian Gray was. He gives up just 3 catches for 27 yards, does a great job peeling off of a route to go get that first interception. He deflected another ball that set up the junior interception. So I thought the depth in the secondary, that's a couple of names we haven't been spending a lot of time talking about, but more examples of just how deep Al Golden is going into this roster and getting really strong contributions. Again, I get it, Miami of Ohio, but I think still really positive signs. Curious, Mike, who else you thought kind of stepped up in that narrative of depth on the defense?
Yeah. I mean, looking at the defense, to me, it was the secondary in particular really stood out, which you touched on. But then the linebackers also, they really stood out to me as well. And actually, when I even looked at Pro Football Focus, it was the linebacker core and the secondary in particular that graded out really well. So it doesn't always, I would say Pro Football Focus, the grades don't always match up exactly what I'm seeing when I'm watching. But in this case, it did. And 2 players in particular, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Osbury, I thought they played with a tremendous amount of speed. I'm not going to say that they're necessarily the next JOK or Jalen Smith, but there were certainly some flashes of athleticism that were very reminiscent of what we saw from those 2 players. Neither had a missed tackle. Neither allowed a catch in coverage. Osbury had a big sack. So I think overall, just the athleticism that we saw there is something that we haven't always had that. And it's great to see that. It's great to see that level of speed and also just coverage ability, just back in the linebacker core.
So let's flip to the offense. Notre Dame scores 28 points in this game. And if I would have told you that going into this, the success rate was 51%, again, offenses want to be in the mid 40s. We only allow a 9% havoc rate. So only 9% of plays was Miami able to disrupt us. Defenses really want to be probably about twice as high as that. And we generated explosiveness. We had a number of big plays in this game, capstone with a couple of the Riley Leonard runs, including the 50-yarder to kind of close this thing out. But we didn't get there. Like, we only scored 28 points. Like, I would have told you, I thought we would have been scoring, 40 or 50 points if you gave me those advanced metrics. What held us back without talking about quarterback play? We'll get there kind of to round out the show, but how do you contextualize those gaudy advanced metrics and you look up at the scoreboard and it's 14-3 at halftime and we win it 28-3, but felt like we left a lot of points on the table?
This is where you really need to double click. Jim's going to get after me for saying double click. One of our buddies has been criticizing me and Brett for ever saying any sort of corporate term in here.
We'll take that offline and circle back with the group once we're able to double click on this one.
Yeah, so Jim, flying 10,000 feet. We're flying 10,000 feet here if I'm taking that approach. But anyway, so Brett, to answer your question, I think it's, if you really want to dive in just beyond the headline stats, that's really what you have to do here. So you mentioned some of these stats, the high success rate, the limited havoc, but that doesn't necessarily account for the impact that these havoc plays can have. And that's exactly what happened here. So Leonard's fumble, that was after a big run. We were moving, into a really good position to score, but then, coughed up the ball. That definitely cost us points. And then the muffed punt. So those impact havoc the exact same as just a batted pass that, just goes out of bounds essentially. So particularly impactful. But they aren't, I would say from an advanced stats standpoint, they are essentially kind of fluky plays, especially fumbles. So if you're looking at predictability here, if you're looking to project out how you think Notre Dame is going to perform moving forward, these types of plays, they tend to not impact it as much as you would think. So I would say if you're trying to, read between the lines in terms of what this means for Notre Dame against Louisville, it honestly probably doesn't mean a whole lot. You really have to look at what Brett was saying, like success rate, explosiveness, like total yardage. For instance, we had 428 yards. So I think it's in most scenarios, if we were to replay this game, we would probably come away with more points. So I think I hate to just say it was bad luck, but honestly, that is a bit of what happened here.
I completely agree, especially there were two PI calls too. So I mean, you look at that 428 yards of offense and it's not counting in the, two downfield pass interference we were able to draw that they got us another 30 yards of offense. And so the way I thought of it is if you say those are your advanced metrics and it led to generating 428 yards of offense and getting the other team to commit 100 yards worth of penalties. Miami of Ohio had 10 penalties for 100 yards.
Yeah.
You'd be like, yeah, by and large, that'll generate a lot more points game in, game out. And so I actually walked away from this feeling really good about our offense, especially in the run game. A big day on the ground for Riley Leonard, a big day on the ground for Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price. There's an interesting thing with Love and Price, too, that we've been noticing over time, something I think we're going to start paying more attention to. We don't play Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price on third down. And I think a lot of NFL teams kind of have third down specialists that are, either bruisers to get short yardage, rushes, or are really good pass blocking. And so therefore, they're the right guys in third and long. And so we have Anais Williams and Devin Ford playing that role, our third and fourth running backs on the depth chart, and not Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. And I just can't imagine Love and Price are that bad in pass protection that you wouldn't want them still as a ball catcher, still in that, third and manageable, call it third and 5, third and 8, like sprinkling in, not all the time, but sprinkling in some runs that are really to set up 4th and 1, 4th and 2, but also to just keep the defense guessing, right? Like not get so predictable. And you just know when Anais Williams and Devin Ford comes in, we're passing the ball. Like it's just gotten very predictable. So, a big game for the, running game overall. Something that I want to, kind of just watch going forward is probably some third down roster management. But I want to call out too, Miami of Ohio is a good defense. Like they're ranked around number 50 in SP plus. So they're an above average defense. I'm not saying they're elite, but they're arguably the fourth best, the fourth best defense that we're going to play this year. I think Louisville, Texas A&M, and I'm forgetting one other. I think it was maybe Florida State's defense is still, according to SP Plus, a better defense than Miami of Ohio. But this is the third or fourth best defense we're going to play all year. To go out and put up 430 yards of offense, I know it's easy to get frustrated on the slow start. It's easy to get frustrated being down 3-0 going into the second quarter, really kind of halfway through the second quarter before we really turn on the Jets. But when you then step back and say, okay, after the first quarter, we were rolling out like a 60+% success rate and we're just marching down the field every single time. It's a pretty good day at the office, despite some of the kind of fluky turnovers, clean those up. But from what was actually being produced on the football field, that was a really efficient day for Denbrock and the Notre Dame offense.
Totally. Yeah, Brett. So I think from a predictability standpoint, it's easy to anchor on the stress that we were feeling in the first quarter, but when you look at the game as a whole, it actually discounts that pretty significantly. And then we using SP Plus, which is what we talk about the most, we really didn't take a hit at all in that. So essentially, what happened is, yeah, we came out the gates a little slow, but then we looked like the team that we should have looked like for the majority of the game. And I think it's like if you're trying to figure out what you think this team will look like moving forward, it's more that team that we saw from midway through the second quarter onward.
Absolutely. So flipping the page, going ahead to next week, we got the Louisville Cardinals coming to Notre Dame Stadium, 3:30 kickoff. I believe this is a Peacock only game, so go out, get your Peacock subscriptions, be ready to watch Notre Dame take on this team here in a big revenge matchup. As everyone knows, Louisville knocks us off in a big upset, or at least a mild upset last year on the road. Notre Dame loses 33-20. I hope to never have to think about that running back. What was his name again? Jawar Jordan, who
Yeah.
gouged us for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is no longer on the Louisville roster. Thank goodness for Notre Dame fans. And they bring in a really well-coached team by Jeff Brom, a very balanced football unit. They're number 21 in defensive efficiency and number 18 in offensive efficiency, according to SP Plus. That is good enough for number 12 overall in the SP Plus rankings. Notre Dame, for context, is number 11. For context, the next two best teams on Notre Dame's roster, or on Notre Dame's schedule, is USC at number 24 and Texas A&M at number 19. So, Mike, I'll ask you the question: is this the best team Notre Dame will play this year?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, it's still early in the season, but I would say based on what we've seen so far, I would say probably yes. And you have to qualify it a bit. They've played two FCS teams, but interestingly, so they're as you mentioned, number 12 in SP Plus. However, there are big readjustments that happen after week 6. So for the advanced stats, that's when you get enough in-game data to where you can kind of start removing the impact more of these preseason variables. So stuff like recruiting rankings, how you did in the past season. But Bill Connolly had a tweet. This is the guy who does SP Plus. He had a tweet last week, I think, and he said something along the lines of, if he were to make these week 6 adjustments right now, just based on based on just what has happened the first few games, Louisville would stand to benefit the most. So they're number 12 right now in SP Plus, but based on what they've done, you could argue that they should potentially even be ranked higher. So I think we didn't really know coming into the season who exactly. We thought Texas A&M. We certainly knew that was going to be a tough game, but then there was some debate about whether or not it'd be USC or Florida State or Louisville who would be the toughest game. It seems like Florida State has certainly proven that they will not be nearly as tough a game as maybe we had thought. USC could be tough, but I still think Louisville is going to be. I think they're going to be the toughest game that we face this year.
Yeah, and interestingly, I think it's important that we spend a lot of time on just the one FBS opponent they've played so far. They beat Georgia Tech 31-19. Their two other games are against FCS opponents and, blew them out handily. And so I think it's a little hard to say. It's why a lot of the advanced metrics wait until week 6 to kind of make some of these adjustments, because even now, 3-4 weeks into the season, you're not hearing us talk about their season preview anymore, but we're also talking about like one data point. Like, what
Yeah.
can we glean from one game in this Georgia Tech game? And so, Mike, as we've gone through the research, I'm curious what stood out to you, but this was a game where they played a solid Georgia Tech team. I don't think Georgia Tech's a top 25 team, but I think they're a pretty good program.
Yeah.
And it was a 5-point game late. Louisville winds up blocking a field goal and returning it for a touchdown to seal the game. They also had a fumble, scoop, and score earlier in the game. And you remove those two plays, I mean, it was a dogfight. It was a very even matchup with Georgia Tech, and really just had kind of, a special teams touchdown and a defensive touchdown really swing the table. I thought the biggest thing that stood out to me is they were great in run defense. They
Mm-hmm.
were horrible in run offense. Curious what else stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Georgia Tech, I agree with you. Georgia Tech is a solid team, not top 25. I guess when they beat Florida State, maybe people were thinking they could be, but they're probably like I don't know, top 30, top 35, maybe somewhere in that range, like a pretty good team. I thought it was interesting that Georgia Tech actually outgained them pretty significantly. So Georgia Tech had 410 yards, Louisville had 332. You mentioned the scoop and score. You mentioned the field goal. So look, Louisville ended up winning this game, but in some respects, Georgia Tech definitely looked better. So I was talking about the advanced stats. They're number 12, and in some of the other games they looked extremely impressive. But if you're looking at their first real test against an FBS opponent, it definitely gives you a few things to kind of maybe question how good they actually are. I still think they're good. I think based on this one performance, you probably want to hedge a little bit. I think look, I do think like Louisville's defense is kind of probably where you want to start. I think that's to me, that seems like that's the unit generating the most impact. So top 20 unit, they've generated a lot of havoc, 12 sacks through 3 games. You mentioned the 2 FCS opponents, so that makes it a little difficult to assess. So it's a little bit of bend but don't break in some respects. So in Georgia Tech, for instance, they give up a lot of yards, but they actually didn't really give up a whole lot of points. So whether or not that ends up being the case for the entire year, or as the season goes on, they start giving up more points, that'll be interesting to watch. I think one aspect here is that They do lack depth a bit. So key stars, TJ Quinn, this leading tackler from a year ago, but he's actually not grading out well through 3 games, 61 on Pro Football Focus. That's barely above replacement. So certainly not having a huge impact. And then a lot of the contributors on the defensive line through three games put up some stats, but is largely just against these FCS opponents. And 0 sacks against Georgia Tech. Haynes King, solid quarterback for Georgia Tech, but he was essentially just passing on Louisville at will, which is interesting because I think going in, I would have expected Louisville to have held up better against the passing game. And then in this game, that was an area that they seemed to be a little bit weaker. But
it is pretty interesting. Like I went back and read the season preview we did on them, and the strength of their defense was supposed to be a couple of their quarterbacks. Corey Thornton's a guy that came in from UCF, Tavion Nicholson from Illinois, and then they brought back Quincy Riley as one of their starters, and really haven't graded out very well here for the first few games. You mentioned Haynes King, their really only real challenge. Kind of ripped him apart, had 300 plus passing yards. Yeah. I don't necessarily think Riley Leonard's the guy to do it. What stood out to me is the place to maybe go get Louisville was supposed to be their kind of reworked defensive line, and they were great against Georgia Tech in run defense in this first game. They gave up just 98 rushing yards on 37 carries, just 2.6 yards per rush, had 7 tackles for a loss. So they weren't really generating havoc via the passing defense, via sacks and deflections and interceptions. They were doing it in the run defense, which I think will be a very interesting matchup overall for Notre Dame, because I don't think this is a scenario where Notre Dame necessarily gets our pass game going. I don't think we've seen anything on paper to suggest this is the day that Riley Leonard turns it on and, turns into Haynes King and throws for 300 yards. But I also don't think Louisville has seen a rushing attack like Notre Dame's this year. That's just not Georgia Tech's bread and butter right now. That's not how they're built. Their leading running back by carries, by yards, by every metric is also their quarterback. But they don't have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. And so I think that will be the really interesting matchup, where the perceived weakness as of last week in the secondary, we might not be able to exploit, but their perceived strength hasn't faced anything close to what Mike Denbrock's bringing in terms of a rushing attack. And I think that sets up for a really interesting matchup from the Louisville side of the ball. Mike, flipping to the offense, every top guy from a year ago is gone. Jack Plummer, a quarterback, Jawar Johnson, a running back, and Jamari Thrash, a wide receiver, all graduate. Tyler Show is the kind of top name to know, 6th-year senior at quarterback, transfers in from Texas Tech. Really tough injury history, hence why he's a 6th-year senior. And, you feel from that perspective, but when healthy, has been a really productive quarterback, and he's viewed as the guy that can hopefully take this team to the next level. Do you view this offense for Louisville as an upgrade from where they were a year ago? And who are the big guys to know on that team?
It's an interesting question. I wouldn't say I immediately think that it's an upgrade from last year. I think certainly they've taken some big steps back in the run game. So you mentioned no Jawar Johnson, someone who was giving us nightmares last year. But, look, I think it's the FCS stats make it a little difficult. So they're averaging 7 yards per carry. But if you play 2 FCS teams, that's going to juice up your stats a little bit. And then against Georgia Tech, which was really their first test, they struggled quite a bit. I do think that it looks like, so Duke Watson, he has 12 attempts for 141 yards. That's impressive, but ranks 5th on the team in carries. That's probably the one guy who seems like they have the most potential on a carry by carry basis. But overall, I would say there's not one guy in that running back room that really stands out. It seems like it's running back by committee. So I think that just means to me that, that aspect of their offense is something that we should be able to hold in check pretty easily. And it's pretty one-dimensional. I mean, you mentioned the quarterback, you mentioned Tyler Show. He's had some good stats. They have some good skill position players. Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama, 17 catches. Although no one on the team other than him has more than 6. But this is someone who put up some stats for Bama a couple years ago, but then basically got passed up. But was a 5-star out of high school, number 27 in the class. Something, Brett, you and I had talked about was that this is someone that ideally Notre Dame would be able to recruit in the undergraduate transfer portal. So I have to bring that up because anytime we get to bring that up, we just have to just to remind everyone. But I think, look, it's the talent is definitely in the passing game. It's a quarterback, it's Ja'Cory Brooks, but it's one dimensional. So I think for Notre Dame, I think this is a pretty good matchup. I think Ja'Cory Brooks is impressive, but I think you put Ben Morrison on him, and then our defense now, which has actually been generating a lot of havoc, I think we should be able to make Tyler Show pretty uncomfortable. We can leave our corners and safeties, on an island and not have to worry too much about the run game. So I think this actually works out pretty well for us. This is assuming our defense shows up, which they, which they generally have. I think this is a game where we're going to be able to hold and check their offensive output.
By the way, I totally screwed this up, but I'm also the one that caught it. So I'm about to hand off a Malort shot to you because I'm the one that caught this real time. It's Tyler Shuck. I know it's not spelled like that at all, but it's like shucking corn, even though it looks like it's, SH and then cough. It's Tyler Shuck at quarterback.
Okay.
I completely agree that historically one-dimensional offenses don't do well against Al Golden. We saw that with Miami of Ohio. We knew going in that, this was a one-dimensional offense. Didn't go very well. I get it. We're not playing Miami of Ohio next week. I'll take Caleb Williams as a great example. When Caleb Williams had a dynamic running game, it was a really interesting matchup against Notre Dame. When they didn't have a dynamic running game and it was pretty much Caleb Williams or bust, Notre Dame ate them apart. And so I don't think, Ja'Cory Brooks is the, toughest wide receiver that Notre Dame necessarily plays this year. Maybe he is. I think that probably belongs to the USC wide receiving core. But I do think that this is by far the best cornerback that Ja'Cory Brooks will face. He is not going up against another Ben Morrison this year. And so I think this is a really big opportunity for Al Golden to show once again that if you're going to beat Notre Dame's defense, you've got to be dynamic and you need to be balanced within your offense. I don't think Louisville is that today. The limiting factor in all of this is we really have one data point last Saturday that says, okay, they're, a one-dimensional pass-heavy offense. Let's get into some score predictions. SP Plus has Notre Dame in this one favored by about 7 to 8 points. The early line from Vegas has Notre Dame as a 4.5-point favorite. So Vegas likes Louisville a little bit more than the advanced metrics do. Over under 48.5 points. That implies a 26 to 22 score. ESPN has Notre Dame winning this one 67% of the time. Mike, what's your score prediction?
I think this one's going to be close. I think it's going to be stressful. I have Notre Dame winning 20-17. I think it'll be a defensive battle. I suspect what Louisville is going to do is I think their secondary is going to have a better performance than what they did against Georgia Tech. I think that they're going to look at our tape and they're going to say, hey, you know what? We're going to put our secondary on an island against the Notre Dame receivers and try to make them beat us through the pass, sell out against the run. And I think the question here is whether or not our run game with Riley Leonard, will that be enough to overcome this? Like if they're stacking the box constantly. I think it could be enough for us to get the win. I don't think it's going to be pretty. I don't think we're going to put up a lot of points, but I think that's what Louisville's strategy here is going to be. So I have us winning. I have it being tight. I think we're going to be stressed through the entirety of this game. Brett, if you're at this game, I think your voice would probably be gone.
Well, fortunately, I will be in Rome drinking, Barolo wine on the Spanish Steps outside Trevi Fountain or something other than being in Notre Dame Stadium, probably trying to find an American bar to watch this one. I've got a more aggressive win for Notre Dame. I've got Notre Dame winning this one 24-10, another Al Golden masterpiece. Look, I've said all year, I don't think we're giving up 20 points in a game this year. I think we have a top 5 defense. I think they have been lights out, game in, game out. And I just don't think unbalanced offenses that are one-dimensional can figure out Al Golden. I just don't see it with the depth and the talent up and down front 7, secondary. It's just so stout. I don't see Louisville going off in this game. And I don't necessarily see our offense going, running them away either. But I think that this is going to be a slugfest. We're going to wear them down over time. And I just think we have more weapons to be able to figure out how to move the ball, go and get some points. I've got Notre Dame winning this one 24-10. Mike, for our last segment, Riley Leonard. So I texted you during the game that I was wrong. On the show last week, I was the one more of a defender, an apologist of Riley Leonard. I talked about how big his running game ability was and how it could make up for deficiencies in passing game in a way that that dimension just doesn't exist if you go to a guy like Steve Angeli. And
Yeah.
then we watched this passing game look not great against Miami, Ohio. And so we broke it down a little bit. We've got some stats to share, but I'm going to start really by trying to get there through questions because actually I've gone through the stats. So, I'm texting you during the game. I'm wrong. You're right. Riley Leonard's got to be on the hot seat. We have to maybe not pull the trigger, but be seriously considering Steve Angeli. As I've worked through the stats of that game and gone back kind of through how that game unfolded, I'm actually back to kind of where I was last week. I get it optically. It doesn't look great. I get it optically. We don't have a Heisman Trophy quarterback on our hands, but the guy's on track to run for 1,300 yards and 18 touchdowns. He's on track to be an All-American running back. I had a buddy that I was with this weekend say, do you think Riley Leonard is a better running back than Jeremiah Love? I don't think in the NFL, but in the college game, as good. I'm not going to say he's better, but he's on pace for 1,300 yards and 18 touchdowns. So I'm walking back where I was 24 hours ago, but I'm acknowledging this is a really important question. We have to keep talking about it because our passing game right now is terrible. And it is holding us back with a partial offset of, yeah, but now we have one of the best rushing attacks in the country. So,
Yeah.
Mike, with that as my preamble, I'm going to give you the floor because I'm the one that's wavering on this. I'm the one that's flip-flopping more than any flip-flopper has flip-flopped. Should Riley Leonard start against Louisville?
Yeah, I mean, look, I flip-flopped as well. I think during the game, I was for sure more in the camp, definitely in the first quarter, that this was not a tenable situation. We probably needed to get Angeli in there to just give us some sign of life. But as I mentioned, I think, and this goes for the team as a whole, we really picked it up in the second quarter, and that especially goes for Riley Leonard. So I think one thing we were nervous about as we were watching it, especially in the first quarter, was, oh crap, is Riley Leonard, is he getting a case of the yips now? Because there's even simple throws that we know that he can make, throws that he would make at Duke. He was all of a sudden struggling with these short screen passes, short passes to the sideline that were, no more than maybe 3 yards out. So he had basically five incompletions against Miami that were considered uncatchable throws, not throwaways, just very bad throws, way overthrown. It reminded me a bit of when we were watching Brandon Wimbush in 2018 before we replaced him with Book. And there were certain things that Wimbush would do that were fantastic. He was a great runner, really strong arm. I think for that Michigan game in week 1 in particular, he did a lot that won us that game. But eventually it got to the point to where he just couldn't even complete simple throws and we had to replace him. So I was starting to get that vibe in the first quarter. And interestingly, I have to note that we didn't really do any QB runs in the first quarter, which is one of his greatest strengths. So maybe there's some element there where the defense, we weren't kind of keeping them on their toes as much as we should have. But once we got into the second quarter or midway through the second quarter, Riley Leonard, he looked better. He was starting to do these QB runs that were more effective. He was looking better as a passer as the game went on. And he actually had that touch. He finally had a touchdown. We finally got some explosiveness in the passing game. So I think my takeaway is he did enough to hold on to the job for now, but he is definitely on the hot seat. And I think that if we start seeing what we saw in the first quarter against Miami of Ohio versus Louisville, if we see that, I think we have to give him a real short leash.
Yeah, I agree that he has a short leash if we come out looking like we did in this last game against Miami. I do think it is important to acknowledge just how bad the passing game is. So, a couple stats. Through 4 games, we have 1 passing touchdown. We are on track for 4 passing touchdowns throughout this entire season. Now I get it. He could go out and throw for 3 and, surpass that number in a week. But through 4 games, 1 passing touchdown. 2, we rank 114th in pass efficiency in the country out of 133 teams. Riley Leonard is the 124th graded starting quarterback on Pro Football Focus. Riley Leonard is on pace for 1,800 passing yards. That would be the least by the leading passer of a Notre Dame team since Brandon Wimbush in 2017, when he ultimately got benched by Ian Book. And before that, you'd have to go back to 2007 when Jimmy Clausen got hurt, and then Evan Sharpley came in as a backup throughout that year. The two of them combined for an even lower number than that. So you are talking in the last 17 years, really the worst passing attack that Notre Dame has had at quarterback. And that's after last year when we were talking about how Sam Hartman was kind of underwhelming and how we thought it was more on the wide receivers and no one getting open and that room being a mess. Like, we've moved backwards in the passing game. Massively troubling when you're also factoring in that, his completion percentage is fine in the 60-65% zip code, but we're not asking him to throw the ball downfield. And to your point on the yips, 5 just bad incompletions against Miami where, like, we never even just had a shot because the ball is just a horrible throw. We had 7 of those against NIU. Like, I am acknowledging the passing game is a mess. I get it. That's on Riley Leonard, Marcus Freeman, and Mike Denbrock to figure out. But also, like, his running ability is pretty darn special. Just for some context, he is number 4 among all quarterbacks in the country with 16 missed tackles forced. So you've asked the question, well, is that sustainable? I mean, at some point, like, that's a really good number as is. Like, for context, Jeremiah Love is number 8 in the country with 25 missed tackles forced. Riley Leonard's number 33, regardless of position. So, like, regardless of position, he has more missed tackles than everyone except the top 32 other running backs and quarterbacks in the country. And those other teams have played FCS opponents. Those other teams haven't all played the juggernauts of their schedule either. But he's proving to have an elusiveness and explosiveness. In this last game against Miami, he had 3 breakaway runs of 15 yards or more, including 2 TDs, including the 50-yarder to the house that really put the kind of cherry on top of the ice cream to close out that game. And I maintain that element is way more effective at opening up running lanes for Jeremiah Love than, say, a better passing game. Like, they still have to have a secondary right now. We still are running routes. We are still attempting passes. Frankly, I might argue he shouldn't be throwing the ball 25 times a game. But, like, I don't think Steve Angeli opens up the passing game in a way that would not otherwise allow, like, the same attention that goes to Riley Leonard's legs and his run threat that I think is opening up a really, really big part of the offense, not just for Riley Leonard, but for Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. But that's hard to know when you're skipping balls. Like, that's hard to know when you're making a 5-10 yard throw and you can't even get the ball there. It's a really, really tough question. Like, I can make the argument that what is happening in the running game is so dynamic, let it ride. I can also make the argument, like, look, you're just, there's another college football podcast, The Solid Verbal, that we cite a lot. They refer to dink and dunk offenses as pickleball offenses. Like, you're not really trying to play tennis. You're not trying to play the real sport. You're trying to keep it in a small box. You're trying to do the little this, little that, pretend like you're playing the real thing, but you're playing pickleball. You're not playing tennis. And when we watch Riley Leonard play quarterback, it kind of feels like a pickleball offense. It kind of feels like the ceiling is dink and dunk, dink and dunk, dink and dunk, and then just try to, like, mash the football and not actually do what modern offenses are supposed to do. I'm really torn, but I think if a guy's on track for 1,300 yards and 18 rushing touchdowns, he's your guy until proven otherwise. And I think being proven otherwise is like another L. But I don't know. It's a really tough question right now.
It's tough. Yeah. And so this is where we kind of are veering away more from, like, I would say, statistical analysis and diving into the stats and more hypothetical. It's like, what
Pickleball
is
offense, just to be clear, is not an advanced metric endorsed by Kyra Stock.
Yeah, well, it's hypothetical because it's really the question is okay, is our offense going to open up more if we have Riley Leonard, who's really effective in the running game, causing the defense to react to that, or is it more effective if you have someone who's more proven in the passing game? Although obviously with Angeli, there's still some question marks there. And Brett, I mean, look, I think like the fact that I'm saying that Riley Leonard has done enough to remain the quarterback and shouldn't be benched immediately. I'm definitely open to it. I think I'm definitely open to seeing if this works. I am, of course, a bit. There are some alarms going off. I would say, on alert. I'm very cautious. I'm nervous about how that's going to hold up. I think as we go on to different teams. I think one other thing to mention with Leonard though is we called this out before. I mean, he missed all of spring ball, pretty much most of the summer. Um, there is an element here where he could be improving week to week, right? There's stuff that the staff is seeing that maybe we're not seeing. We finally saw some ability of him to hit downfield passes. So, right, I mean, if the staff believes that he's building and he's going to click, then of course you got to keep him. So that is like kind of an unknowable thing for us, and I think that is actually a big point for keeping him. Now, in terms, like I would say, what makes me nervous is that I just can't think of many examples in modern college football where there is an offense that doesn't really have any passing attack that's able to be an effective offense. And that's not to say that it can't be done. I mean, even Michigan last year, extremely run heavy, but they could certainly pass the ball. JJ McCarthy was a first round pick. So I think it's just there are just many more cases in the current college football landscape where just the key to moving the ball downfield, the key to putting up enough points is in that downfield passing game. And I think what I see with Leonard, I think what makes me nervous is I think he's put up a lot of his running stats are very impressive, and it's been against bad to I would say slightly above average defenses. I wouldn't say really any great defenses at this point. The question is whether or not it's going to be able to hold up against better defenses. And the good thing is we don't really play any great defenses really for the remainder of this year. So I think we can. I think we might be able to scrape by. But then if our ambitions are to make the playoff, at some point we are going to have to play a better defense, and that's where I get nervous. I do think my philosophy with the quarterback tends to be you have to start with a quarterback who can pass. And if they can run, that's a bonus, unless they are such an effective runner that it's someone like Michael Vick. And I guess with Riley Leonard, he's put up stats. I mean, look, he's put up stats that would kind of imply sort of that level, but I am skeptical that once we play a team that's more effective defensively, whether or not he's going to be able to do it. I think Louisville is going to be a really good data point for this, though, because in theory they should have a good secondary. They are a team who could maybe they're a little weaker against the run, so that is one thing that kind of clouds it a little bit. But if they're able to just totally sell out against the run, and they are a top 20 defense, and he still does it against them, then Brett, I think I actually will be much more comfortable with your approach here. But I would say my gut, my heart is just telling me to be on alert, just because I haven't really seen this before, and I do think with Angeli, it's just like my gut tells me that a downfield passing attack is what just seems to always open up offenses more than anything else. And look, like I said, there are question marks with Angeli. We don't really know how good there's some good data points. I'll go through some of them right here. So Purdue, right? He was the highest graded player. It's garbage time, but Purdue largely kept their starters in, or at least people in there too deep. Oregon State, Sun Bowl, he had 3 touchdowns, 79% completion percentage, put up some big yards.
By the
And
way,
then,
their coach left and they
yes,
led bowl season in opt-outs.
yes,
So all of those are great data points, but also Purdue and Oregon State in the bowl game are kind of a scrimmage.
yes.
Like,
So Brett, totally agree. Not the super.
yeah,
He's not doing this against the, he's not doing it against the
he's not doing this
49ers.
against Louisville.
He's not doing,
He's not doing this against Louisville, which I think is what the staff needs to assess. I
yeah.
don't know if we know enough about Steve Angeli to make that call for sure, but who should have the best view is the staff.
Yes. So I think Brett, where I'm at is, and like I think other times we've seen him, it's been good. Like the rest of the season last year, mop up duty, right? He had some pretty impressive stats. 76% completion percentage, 4 TDs, and interception. He's looked good in spring games if you care about that. So I think altogether, there's like a reasonable case that I think you can definitely assume that Angeli is going to elevate the passing game. I don't know that we know exactly to what extent yet, because we haven't seen him in extensively when the pressure's on, right? When it's really kind of like live or die mode. But I think he's shown us enough where if Riley Leonard really struggles against Louisville, if we're not able to run the ball like we have against some of these other teams, I think that what Angeli has done so far is enough to warrant a switch if it is a big struggle against Louisville, say through a half on offense.
I'm also really curious if um, there's an upside case we're not talking about, and that's just Riley Leonard becomes a better quarterback throwing the ball from a stats perspective, and not because all of a sudden it's gone. Like like it's not like he all of a sudden becomes Patrick Mahomes. That's not what I'm proposing.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty clear against Northern Illinois. We were trying to say, okay, against Northern Illinois, let's figure out if Riley Leonard can throw the ball. And the answer became a pretty resounding no. And then he was maybe dinged up. And then, like, I just thought we called a bad game. Like, we didn't go and mash it down their throat when we were running the ball for 7 yards a carry. Like, there was a very, very proven thing working in that game, and we didn't do it. Against Purdue, we said we are doing nothing else but our strength, and ran it right down their throat and won 66-7. And it looked amazing. It was like one of the greatest offensive outputs you could possibly hope for. I think against Miami of Ohio, we went somewhere in between the two where we said, got it. Purdue's the blueprint, but let's keep experimenting. Let's keep saying, hey, what else can work? And by the way, the downfield passing against Miami, Ohio was electric. We had the long touchdown pass. Riley Leonard was 4 for 8 on throws over 10 yards down the field or more, which 50% is a really high clip rate on downfield throws. And we drew 2 deep pass interference penalties. So we were really like 6 for 10 on generating chunk yardage, throwing the ball downfield. I get it's Miami, Ohio. I get it's not a top 5 opponent. I get all of that. But it's almost like Denbrock's still trying to figure out, hey, where is Riley Leonard in all of this? Like, do I need to not have Riley Leonard, try to get through 4 progressions to take a deep shot? Do I just need to give him a single route, you're chucking it deep, unless if it is absolutely blanketed with the safety? Like, are we still working through kind of Riley Leonard, Mike Denbrock figuring each other out? Hey, I don't have Jaden Daniels. I have Riley Leonard. He's not a Heisman Trophy winner, but what's the in-between success? And I think we saw flashes of that, including in the deep passing game for Miami, Ohio. And I think there's a real upside case there. I think there's a real potential that it's just going to get better. And Denbrock wasn't showing all of his cards. But if you took the best of Miami, Ohio, you took the best of Purdue, that actually does have an element of explosive passing within it that's still very run heavy. And you're maybe just not showing all your cards until you show up against Louisville. That drives me nuts that it takes a L against Northern Illinois to get there. But I do think there's like a reasonable, I don't think this is a far-fetched case to get there. I think that's a reasonable path that says Riley Leonard's your guy until proven otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, look, I want to see more data from him. I think the scenario you're talking about is reasonable enough to where you got to keep him in and see more. But we also can't screw around too much. So if it's looking a little shaky, then we can't hesitate to move on. But yeah, I mean, look, I just keep coming back to. I think you made a comment 2 weeks ago or something like that. I think this is probably after the NIU game. You're like, I think we underestimated, or we did not properly estimate how difficult it is to pull all these pieces together so quickly. So there is an element here where just the chemistry with the receivers gets a lot better. We start seeing the downfield passing more. Denbrock is there's stretches through some of these games where we're just not doing the QB run, or we're not running with Riley Leonard for some reason. That seems to really bog down our offense when we don't do that. And if we just stop doing that, of course, there's more injury risk if you do it too much. But if you just even do it a minimum, there's a minimum amount of times that you can do it where it's still pretty effective. But I think if you kind of put all that together, there's a scenario where this works out. But all that being said, it's not DEFCON. I guess technically DEFCON 1 is the one that's the worst, right? It's not DEFCON 1, but maybe it's like, I don't know. I would say maybe like DEFCON 3 or something like that. I think that's kind of where I'm at.
Total alignment. I think you and I have both kind of moved back and forth on this topic. It is the biggest concern. I don't want to, overstate or understate that point. This is the biggest concern for Notre Dame football right now is our passing attack. We think the coaching staff has it right to hang in there with Riley Leonard. We also agree it's a short leash. And it's also a very, very important thing that Marcus Freeman has to get right over this year and into future seasons is developing quarterback. It's the most important position. So, Mike, I don't know any Italian. What is goodbye in Italian? Bon voir? No, that's French.
It's a
I don't.
Malort shot.
It's a.
I should know this. I was there a year ago. I don't know. I
I'll
think
look it up.
if you're American, they're not gonna. I don't think they're gonna be too upset if you're butchering their language. I think they expect it over there. If when we're vacationing over there in
Arrivederci.
Europe.
Arrivederci. Adio. Ciao. Ciao. I'm gonna go with ciao.
Ciao.
I know that one. We'll go with ciao.
Just say that, yeah, or just nod
All
your
right.
head, or just do like that, just
Not
wave.
yet.
Although be careful with some of the gestures you do with your hands, because there's some in Europe that are like they're fine in the United States, but they could like make people pretty mad in Europe.
Well, until then, Irish beat Cardinals.
Go Irish, be Cardinals.
Ciao.
Ciao.